Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. Have you ever felt like a neighbor was watching your every move? My new HOA president was obsessed. She spied on my deliveries and threatened my home with fines. But there was one tiny detail about my property she missed. A detail that made all her threats completely worthless. So how did I turn her own game against her? I want to start with something that sounds incredibly boring, because that boring thing is the reason this whole story ends the way it does. When I bought my house, the title company handed me a thick folder of documents. Most people sign what they're told to sign, shove the folder in a drawer, and never look at it again. I almost did the same thing. But my real estate attorney, who was doing the closing with me, stopped at one page and said I should actually read it. She called it the deed of easement. The short version is this. My property sits in the middle of a subdivision that was built about 15 years ago. But my house predates that subdivision by almost 60 years. The land my house sits on was originally part of a much larger farm, and when developers came in and bought everything around it, the original owner sold off most of the land but kept a couple of acres where the old farmhouse stood. That was the parcel I eventually bought. Because the development was built around this existing parcel, my driveway connects to what became the HOA's private road. The only way in or out of my property is through that road. So when the HOA was formed and the road was formally designated as private, a deed of easement was recorded that guaranteed my right to use it in perpetuity. I pay a small annual road maintenance fee, which was agreed upon in writing, and in exchange I can come and go as I please, regardless of whatever rules the HOA decides to make for its own members. Here is the part my attorney made sure I understood. The deed of easement applies to road access only. My property itself is not part of the HOA. I never signed the CC and Rs, which are the governing documents that HOA members are bound by. My property is not on the HOA's master plot map. As far as the association is concerned, legally, I am basically a neighbor who happens to share a road. My attorney said to keep that folder somewhere I could find it. I did. I work from home. Specifically, I restore vintage mechanical watches, high-end stuff, collectors, estates, insurance claims on family heirlooms, the occasional museum piece. I converted the detached garage on my property into a proper workshop about 3 years after I moved in. Temperature controlled, good lighting, a locking door, the whole setup. It looks professional because it is. The work is quiet, I don't have foot traffic, customers don't show up at my door. What I do have are occasional courier pickups, mostly overnight packages going out to clients, and every few weeks a supplier's van stops by to drop off parts or specialized equipment. For years, nobody cared. My neighbors on the road were mostly people who wanted to be left alone, which suited me fine. I'd wave at people, exchange small talk at the mailboxes. That was about it. The HOA held its meetings in someone's garage and mostly concerned itself with which shade of beige was acceptable for repainting shutters. I wasn't part of it, and I didn't pay it much attention. Then the previous board president moved away and a new one moved in. She bought the house right at the entrance to the cul-de-sac, which meant she had a clear sight line to most of the road, including my driveway. Within a week of moving in, she'd knocked on 3 neighbors' doors to introduce herself and mention that she was very passionate about community standards. Within a month, she'd been elected president of the HOA board. I don't know if anyone ran against her. I don't think anyone wanted the job badly enough to bother. I noticed her noticing me early on. She had a habit of being outside whenever there was any activity on the road, and she had a clipboard that she carried like it was a briefcase. The first time a supplier van pulled into my driveway, she was out at her mailbox within 2 minutes, and I saw her writing something down. The van had a logo on the side. It was there for maybe 20 minutes while I signed for a shipment of watch movements and some cleaning equipment. The thing about the watch restoration work is that it genuinely doesn't make any noise or create any disruption. I'm not running machinery that hums all day. I'm not receiving pallet loads of freight. On a busy week, I might have 2 courier pickups, 1 supplier drop-off, and that's the full extent of any external activity. The workshop looks from the outside like a very well-maintained detached garage, which is exactly what it is. There's nothing about it that would tip off a reasonable person that anything commercial was happening inside. You'd have to be actively monitoring my driveway to even know deliveries were occurring, which is of course exactly what she was doing. 2 days after that, a neighbor I was on decent terms with stopped me while I was taking my trash to the curb. He mentioned carefully that the new board president had been asking questions about what kind of business I was running. He said she'd described it as not appropriate for a residential community to at least 2 other neighbors. I thanked him and didn't think too much of it. A week later, I got the violation notice. It wasn't a letter, it was a form. One of those pre-printed things where someone fills in the blanks. The board president had filled in my address, checked a box that said operating a commercial enterprise in a residential zone, and written a dollar amount in the fine field. $500, payable within 30 days. There was a line at the bottom informing me that failure to pay could result in a lien being placed on my property. I read it twice. Then I went and got that folder out of the filing cabinet. My first move was to go to the next HOA meeting. I want to be clear that I had no obligation to do this. I wasn't an HOA member, but I also hadn't done anything wrong, and I thought there was a reasonable chance that a calm conversation would clear the whole thing up. The president was new. Maybe she didn't know the full history of my property. Maybe she just needed to understand that the rules she was enforcing didn't apply to me. I walked in, took a seat in the back, and waited for the agenda item about violations to come up. When it did, I raised my hand and said I'd like to address the board about a notice I'd received. She let me stand up. I explained briefly and without any hostility that I'd received a violation notice related to my home business. I said I understood the concern, but I wanted to clarify that my property was not part of the HOA, that I didn't have a signed CC&R on file, and that I'd be happy to share my property documentation with the board. She cut me off before I finished my second sentence. She said she appreciated my coming in, but that the community had rules about commercial activity for a reason, and those rules existed to protect property values for everyone in the neighborhood. She said that delivery vans and supplier vehicles created a commercial atmosphere that was inconsistent with what residents had paid for. She also said, and this is the part that stuck with me, that she hoped I understood how my situation might look to the people who'd invested their savings and homes here, and that she'd hate for one property to drag the whole community down. The room was quiet after that. A few people in the front rows nodded along. A couple of people near me shifted in their chairs in a way that suggested they weren't entirely comfortable with what they'd just heard. I said, as evenly as I could, that I would follow up with documentation. She told me the fine would stand, and that if the commercial activity wasn't ceased within 30 days, the board would pursue a lien. I went home and called my attorney. My attorney listened to the whole thing and then laughed, which is the reaction I'd been hoping for. She confirmed what I already suspected. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. Their bylaws were binding on members who had signed the CC&Rs. I was not one of those members. The fine was unenforceable. The lien threat was hollow because you can't lien a property over a debt the owner doesn't legally owe. She also said something useful. She said that the board president had made a mistake by going on record at the meeting with her statements about my property. If this escalated and ended up in front of a judge, those statements would be relevant to a harassment claim. She told me to document everything going forward. I started keeping a log. Over the next several weeks, the pressure increased steadily. The board president organized what she called an architectural review committee visit, which was really just 2 board members showing up at my property line with their phones out, photographing my garage, my driveway, and the signage on delivery vehicles. They didn't come onto my property, but they stood at the edge of it for about 20 minutes while I watched from my kitchen window. Then she called the city. I found out about this because the code enforcement officer called me ahead of time to let me know he was coming. He said he'd received a complaint about possible zoning violations at my address. He was professional about it. He came out on a Tuesday, looked at my setup, asked me a few questions about the nature of the work and the frequency of deliveries, checked my permits, and cross-referenced my address with the city's zoning map. He stood in my driveway afterward and told me my property was zoned for home-based professional services, which covers exactly the kind of work I do. He said I was fully compliant with every applicable city ordinance. He said he'd note that in his report and close the complaint. He shook my hand and left. The board president found out about the inspection results somehow, probably because she'd filed the complaint and the city notified her of the outcome. 2 days later, I found a handwritten note on my door saying that regardless of what the city said, the community had its own standards, and a final accounting of outstanding fines was being prepared. When the formal paperwork arrived, it listed the original $500 fine plus additional charges they'd added for the architectural review visit and what they were calling an administrative processing fee. The total came to $2,500. I went back to my folder. Here's what I decided to do, and I want to explain why I did it this way. I could have sent a strongly worded response immediately. I could have had my attorney fire off a letter. Both of those things might have worked, but I'd been thinking about the city inspection, and something had clicked. When the board president called the city and the city came out and documented that I was in full compliance with all local ordinances, she had created a public record. A record that said, in official language, that nothing I was doing was a violation of any law. She thought she was building a case against me. She had actually built a case for me. What I needed to do now was make sure the HOA's own records created the same kind of documentation. I needed them to put their position in writing formally, in a way that could be used against them later if needed. So I sent a certified letter to the board. It was a request for information, polite, businesslike. It asked for 3 specific things. First, the exact article and section of the HOA bylaws I was alleged to have violated. Second, a copy of the HOA's official master plot map, the recorded document that showed which properties were within the association's jurisdiction. Third, I included a copy of my own title survey, the one from when I bought the house, which showed my property boundaries. I also extended an invitation. I asked the board formally to schedule a site visit at their earliest convenience so we could review the property boundaries together and, as I put it, resolve any jurisdictional ambiguity. Then I waited. The response I got back was not what I expected. Instead of engaging with the specific questions, the board president sent a reply that was mostly about community values and the importance of residents working together in good faith. She said the board had reviewed my request and would respond in due course, but that the outstanding fines remained due and the deadline had not changed. She did not provide the bylaw citation. She did not attach the plot map. That told me something. I sent a follow-up, same certified mail. This one said simply that I had not received the requested documentation and that I was renewing my invitation for a site visit. I set a specific date and time and said I'd have materials prepared for the board's review. I told them I believed that once they saw the relevant property records, the matter could be resolved quickly and without further need for correspondence. The board president showed up with 3 other board members on the day I'd proposed. I think she expected to find me defensive, maybe apologetic. I think she may have believed, still, that she had leverage. I had a folding table set up in my driveway. I'd printed a map. It wasn't anything fancy, just a clean reproduction of the relevant county parcel records overlaid with the HOA's own recorded plot map, which I'd obtained from the county recorder's office a week earlier. The HOA boundaries were outlined in blue. My property was outlined in red. On the map, the HOA territory surrounded my property on all sides. My parcel sat in the middle of it like a hole in the center of a donut. I let them look at it for a moment before I said anything. Then I walked them through it, pointing out the boundary lines, showing where the HOA's jurisdiction started and stopped, and indicating exactly where my property sat in relation to those lines. I showed them the recording date of the HOA's CC&Rs versus the recording date of my deed. My property predated the HOA by decades. Then I told them the part about the CC&RS. I explained that at no point in the history of this property had any owner signed the CC&Rs. When the developer sold the surrounding parcels and established the association, this property was already in separate ownership. It was never enrolled. There was no signed agreement, no recorded covenant tying my land to theirs. The road maintenance fee I paid each year was established separately by the deed of easement and covered only my right to access the road. It had nothing to do with membership in the HOA or compliance with its rules. I pointed to the total on the fine paperwork they'd sent me. "This is the amount you're claiming I owe," I said. I told them they were welcome to take me to court over it and that I would very much enjoy presenting this map to a judge along with a copy of my title survey, the city code enforcement report showing full compliance with all local ordinances, the transcript from the board meeting where the president made her statements about my property, and the certified mail log documenting every piece of correspondence I'd received. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. One of the board members, not the president, looked at the map again and then looked at the president. I saw him start to put something together in his head. The president was the first to speak. She said she'd need to have the board's attorney review the documents. I said that was absolutely her right, and that I'd be happy to provide copies of everything I had. I also said there was one more thing I wanted to raise while we were all together. The private road that runs through the HOA development dead ends at a small cul-de-sac before it reaches my driveway. Every winter, the HOA contracts with a plowing service to clear the road after snowfall. My driveway, which is wider than standard because of the original farm construction, has served for years as the turnaround point for the plow truck. The driver pulls forward into my driveway, swings around, and heads back out. It's a tight road, and without that turnaround, the only option would be for the driver to reverse the full length of the cul-de-sac to get out. This arrangement has always been informal. There is no written agreement about it. The plow truck uses my driveway as a courtesy that I extended without ever being asked, because it seemed like a neighborly thing to do. I explained to the board that I'd been giving this some thought. I said that given the nature of our recent interactions, I wasn't sure I felt comfortable continuing to extend that courtesy. I said I hadn't made any decisions yet, but I wanted them to be aware that if the harassment continued, and if the fine and lien threats were not formally withdrawn, I would be posting my driveway as private property and informing the plow contractor that they were no longer permitted to use it. The board member who'd been looking at the map cleared his throat. He asked the president quietly whether they'd be able to find an alternative turnaround if that happened. She didn't answer him. I told them I hoped it wouldn't come to that and that I genuinely just wanted to be left alone to run my business in peace. I said if the board was willing to formally withdraw the fines and put in writing that they had no jurisdiction over my property, I was happy to let the whole thing go and continue the plow arrangement as before. The meeting ended without a resolution, but it was clear from the way the board members talked to each other on their way out that the dynamic had shifted. The president was still rigid, still convinced she was right, but the others weren't. One of them stopped at the edge of my driveway and said, almost to himself, that he really had not known my property wasn't in the HOA. Over the next 10 days, I didn't hear anything official, but I heard things through a couple of neighbors who were friendly with me. Word was that the board had consulted an attorney, and the attorney had told them more or less what mine had told me. Word was that there was significant tension on the board about what the president had done, not just in terms of the legal exposure, but in terms of how it looked. Taking aggressive action against a non-member neighbor, creating a paper trail that included harassment complaints and an official city report that vindicated me, and now facing a potential lawsuit over fines that could never have been legally enforced. What she had wanted was for me to be scared or embarrassed enough to shut down my business quietly. What she'd actually accomplished was the opposite of that. My attorney sent a formal letter to the board laying out the situation clearly. She noted the lack of any signed CC and R, the recorded deed of easement, the city's compliance finding, and the documented pattern of violations notices. She stated that if the fines were not formally withdrawn and a written acknowledgement of the property boundaries was not provided within 14 days, she would be filing for a declaratory judgment establishing that my property was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, accompanied by a harassment claim. 14 days later, I had the written acknowledgement in my hand. It was signed by 4 of the 5 board members. The 5th signature was the president's, and it took another 4 days to get that one, but it eventually came. The acknowledgement stated that my property was not subject to the HOA's CC and Rs, that all previously issued fines were rescinded, and that the board had no authority to regulate activity on my parcel. The board had also taken a vote by that point to strip the president of her individual authority to issue fines. Going forward, any violation notice would require a full board vote before being sent. She was still the president, technically, but the particular weapon she'd enjoyed using was gone. My business has done well since all of this. I put a small tasteful sign on the garage door indicating it's a professional workshop, not because I need it for clients, but because it felt like a statement worth making. The suppliers still stop by. The FedEx driver knows my name. The overnight packages still go out. Every now and then I see the former fine enforcement enthusiast from across the cul-de-sac. She's still there, still has the clipboard, still attends the board meetings, but she has to look at my workshop every time she pulls out of her driveway, and the branded vans come and go as they always have, and there is absolutely nothing she can do about any of it. When I see her, I give a friendly wave. She does not wave back. The plow truck, for what it's worth, still uses my driveway as its turnaround every winter. Nobody asked me to continue the arrangement. I just left the driveway clear, and the driver pulled in the first time there was snow, and that was that. I don't think the board even remembers that we discussed it. They probably should. There's a particular satisfaction in knowing that the thing someone set out to take from you is not only still standing, but doing better than it was when they started. My workshop is booked out 4 months. I just took on a commission for a private estate collection that will keep me busy through the end of next year. The work is quiet, the clients are great, the couriers come and go, and that donut hole in the middle of their neighborhood is still exactly where it's always been. For anyone reading this who's dealing with something similar, here's what I'd actually recommend. Read your title documents, not just the deed, but everything in the closing folder. Most people don't, and that means they're operating on assumptions about what they own and what agreements they're subject to. The boring paperwork is where the power lives. If someone threatens you with a fine or a lien, ask them in writing to show you exactly which rule you violated and exactly which document gives them authority over your property. Make that request formal. Make it traceable. A lot of these situations fall apart the moment you ask for specific citations, because the person making the threats often hasn't looked that closely at the actual documents either. And if you're in a situation where your property predates the surrounding development, or where the HOA's jurisdiction boundaries aren't completely clear, it is absolutely worth spending a few $100s to have a title attorney review your situation. It was the best money I spent in this entire process. The folder my attorney told me to keep, still in the filing cabinet, still right where she said to keep it. I actually added a copy of the written acknowledgement from the HOA board to it, just in case. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I used to work as a driver for a freight company. We used to handle awkward-sized items that no other couriers would touch. We delivered everything from coffins to tractor parts. We also had to collect things from our customers for delivery the next day. This company had a mixture of contractors and permanent drivers. I was a relief driver. I knew most of the routes, so I covered holidays or sickness. The management of the depot consisted of a delivery manager and a collection manager. These two people didn't quite see eye to eye, as sometimes getting the stuff delivered conflicted with getting stuff collected, and their targets reflected failures in a bad way. This particular day I had to cover a contractor's route. I didn't know the route, so as we had to load our trucks, this took a little longer than usual. I had around 45 deliveries that day, which is high for this predominantly rural route. I asked my manager, the delivery manager, if he knew the route. He replied that he did and ordered my route for me, so I was good to go, albeit a bit late. I did say that with the volume I had, I may struggle, and I asked him to keep an eye out for me. He said okay. I got to near midday and realized that I wasn't going to be able to complete all the deliveries, and the collections wouldn't get done either. I also noted that one of the collections was off route and the contractor had a vehicle in that area anyway. I called in and spoke to my manager, delivery, and told him he had a choice of collections or deliveries. I also asked why the contractor couldn't cover the off-route collection. I was told to call back later and he'll see if can sort something out. He also said that the off-route collection would have to be done too. I called back later and asked for help again. He said there was no help available. So I gave him the option of deliveries or collections, as there wasn't time to do both. I will get to the time a bit later. He categorically said both had to be done. The delivery manager went home, so I called in again and got the collection manager. She reiterated that there was no help at all, so either I failed the deliveries or failed the collections. If that happened, I'd have been hauled into the office the next day, so cue malicious compliance. I called into one of the collections and I asked what time they closed. 6:30 p.m. they said. So I said I'd be back later. I carried on with the deliveries, which took me further away from that collection. At the appropriate time, I stopped delivering and drove to the collection. I collect 2 small parcels. That was all. I then drove back to where I had stopped and carried on delivering. This cost me about an hour. I finished my last delivery at 7:15 p.m. I had a 45-minute drive back to my yard. As I was leaving the round, I got a frantic call from the collection manager. She was wondering where I was. I told her what had happened and told her that I'd asked for help 4 times and was told I had to do everything allocated, so I did, and it wasn't my fault that it happened like this. Here's where the trouble really started. The company's trunking system is a fluid one. It depends on trucks leaving the depot at a certain time. For our depot, the cutoff time is 7:30 p.m. I wheeled in at just after 8 p.m. There were 15 pissed-off guys on overtime waiting for me to turn up and an articulated truck waiting for these 2 parcels. This wait caused the whole trunking system to be late the next day. My routing was discussed when I got back, as it was questionable at best. When I told the collections manager that it was the delivery manager that organized it, there were angry emails between the delivery and collection managers, and I would imagine that the logistics team would have demanded an explanation too. Arses were definitely kicked. The next day no one said a word. I wasn't on that route, and going forward, well, for a little while they either helped when I asked or didn't get me to do as much. Also, as I had exceeded legal driving time, they had to make sure I went home early for a few days, so a bit of a win there. The biggest trouble these guys had was they always assumed that the drivers were after an easy day, and even when presented with the evidence, assumed that you were still trying to be fly. This time it bit them badly. The next one is an entitled people story. Well, if you read my other posts, you already know that Mia was intelligent only academically, so naturally she had excellent grades at school, which gave her a certain impunity in the family, and her parents would let her do anything she wanted, even bullying, except consume a certain oregano. This happened in early 2022. We were 18 years old. Here in Argentina, the pandemic restrictions, which were ridiculously long, had recently gone away. As so many times, I had introduced Mia and my current best friend, calling her Ale, a few months earlier, but their friendship had already begun to weaken due to Mia's personality, and because Ale began to notice the dislike my aunt had for her. Ale's parents are Bolivian immigrants, and she has Andean facial features and a darker skin tone, which was totally a problem for my aunt. We still hanged out together, though, more than anything, because Ale felt sorry for Mia to a certain point. Mia found an Instagram profile of a girl who was selling brownies with oregano, and she totally wanted to try them, so she asked us if we wanted some too, and we said yes. However, there was a problem: my aunt and uncle. So, Mia asked Ale to lend us her house to eat the brownies there, since Ale's mother was not around all day due to work, and her father was in Bolivia at the time, and Ale agreed. I told my mom what we were going to do, since it was my first time trying oregano, and I always knew I could tell my mom anything. My mom told me it was okay, and I asked her not to say a word to my aunt, which she agreed and just gave me the only one condition: to be careful and don't do anything stupid. Ale couldn't say a word to her mother because she probably would end with Ale's life if she knew. So the day arrives, we try the oregano brownies, eat pizza, and have a fun afternoon laughing like seals, eating junk food, and playing video games. Mia and I went back home that night. I was confident that Mia would just go to sleep, and it would be the perfect crime. But as Murphy Law goes, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. What happened? My aunt noticed that Mia's eyes were red, or was it too obvious that Mia was under substances effects by her behavior? No, none of that. In fact, my aunt hadn't noticed anything. It was about to be the perfect crime, but something happened. If you've never tried food with oregano, you have to know it can make your stomach hurt. It's not a big pain, it's tolerable, and we already knew it was normal anyway because we did our research before trying it. It is also normal to feel dizzy, and we knew it. Well, Mia was in bed trying to sleep when she started to feel dizzy and a pain in her stomach, so she had the brilliant idea of running to tell my aunt what we did because she was scared. And before you comment on it, she herself said that it was not such an intense pain that she believed it was a big deal or a threat. The thing is, Mia told my aunt that it was Ale's idea and that we both, Ale and I, forced her to try it. She literally lied and pushed us under the bus so she wouldn't get scolded, as if my aunt had ever seriously punished her anyway. The consequences? My aunt went to tell my mom, insisting that I was a bad influence, that Ale was a word I can't repeat here but that begins with N, and how she was always right to hate her, that I was growing up to be a drug addict, etc. My mom just told her that she already knew what we were doing and that it had been Mia's idea, but naturally my aunt didn't believe it. My aunt even tried to get the number of Ale's mom to accuse her, but luckily my mom sent her to fry churros when she demanded it, because who knows what would have happened if Al's mother had found out. Obviously, Ale and I were furious. Ale stopped talking to her and deleted and blocked her from everywhere, and I didn't talk to her for months. Did this matter to Mia? Not really. She actually said Ale was the toxic one. She even told me I should cut her off. Even my aunt tried to convince me to cut Ale off. Obviously I didn't, and they mocked me and said that time would prove them right and that I would regret to be her friend. It's been more than 3 years and I still don't regret it. The next one is an entitled parent story. I'm in my late 20s, I live on my own and have my own car. My parents are super strict and made me miss out on the college experience, which I'm still bitter about. I come from a family of extroverted people, such as my cousin, who's also accomplished career-wise, but still throws parties with around 70 people, responsibly. She got to have the whole exciting college experience involving large social events and pursuit of creative passions, and now has fun alongside her career. She also wrote and starred in her own musicals, and I have a similar passion for acting that I've never gotten to pursue. I got the similar genes of being fun-loving, creatively passionate, and wanting to enjoy my life. I moved out at 25 to make up for what I've missed out, or at least enjoy my current freedom. The years after moving out have been the best years of my life. However, my parents still make me feel restricted. They literally hired detectives to remotely tap into my phone and read my text messages. They found out I was staying over a friend's house. One of their rules is to never stay over someone's house, and got so mad that they threatened to show up the friend's house to tell her to leave me alone. They're also tracking my car because they know when I'm out late and scold me for it. I can probably find the tracker and remove it, but the detectives part worries me since they're able to do this without a tracker. I guess I'm venting and asking, how do I get them to stop this? Should I threaten to reduce in-person time with them from once a week to every 2 weeks? They got really mad when I suggested that before because even with weekly visits, they miss me too much. I feel sad because I'm missing out socially and romantically, as they still manage to enforce their rules of don't go out after sunset, which is 5:30 p.m., don't sleep over, and don't go out on weekdays to focus on work. I would love to meet and organically form a romantic connection with someone, but my opportunity to meet new people is restricted since after work, weekend times after dark, and the once-a-week day they see me, since they occupy the daylight hours, are off limits for socializing. Anyway, thank you for watching.